Disclaimer: this is a fictional dramatization created for artistic, emotional, and educational storytelling purposes. All characters and events are entirely fictional and created using AI tools. No impersonation, misrepresentation, or harm is intended. The content contains scenes of danger involving child characters. However, no real persons or minors were involved in its production. Grace's Love Stories produces scripted, AI-generated stories that promote, entertain, inspire kindness, and emotional connection. We respect our viewers and strictly adhere to YouTube's policies.
The last light of dusk bled through the ivy-choked window, painting stripes of bruised purple across the cold stone floor. A familiar weakness settled deep in Marwen's bones, a constant companion she knew as intimately as her own breath. It was the taste of the bitter herbs on her tongue, the fog that clung to the edges of her mind, a soft gray blanket smothering every sharp thought. Her stepmother, Alara, called it her illness, a fragility of the blood that required constant, careful management. Every evening, without fail, the silver spoon would be at her lips, the dark, viscous liquid a promise of another quiet, manageable night. Another night of dreams that left her breathless. Dreams of running on 4 feet through a forest dripping with moonlight, a howl trapped in her human throat. The scent of rain and damp earth clung to the air, a wild perfume that made something deep inside her ache with a nameless longing. The Talrith estate, a fortress of crumbling stone and silence, was her entire world. She had never been beyond its moss-covered walls. Tonight, however, the world was coming to them. Guards in unfamiliar livery stood at the gates, their presence a stark slash of steel and leather against the soft decay of the manor. Whispers had slithered through the halls all day, coiled with fear and awe. The Alpha King was coming. The very name, Corvin Dathir, felt like a rumble of thunder, a promise of a storm she could not comprehend. And as the evening deepened, a primal tension tightened in the air, a hum of power that vibrated right through the stone, making her teeth ache. It was a feeling that went beyond the herbs, beyond the fog, a terrifying premonition that the quiet, gray world she knew was about to be torn apart. Alara's footsteps were a series of sharp, precise clicks on the stone stairs. The sound always made Marwen's shoulders tighten. She entered the room without knocking, a tall, severe silhouette against the fading light. Her scent was of dried roses and something sharp, like frozen iron. In her hand she held the familiar small ceramic bowl. "Marwen, it is time," she said, her voice smooth and cool as river stones. "Drink this, all of it. The king will be here soon, and we cannot have you suffering an episode." Marwen looked from the bowl to her stepmother's face. Alara's beauty was a weapon, sharp cheekbones, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a mouth that never truly smiled. She was the one who had taken Marwen in after her mother, the disgraced Luna, had died in exile. Alara claimed it was an act of pity, a duty to her late husband's first family. But the pity felt like a cage, and the duty felt like a leash. Marwen took the bowl, her fingers trembling slightly. The smell was acrid, earthy, the wolfsbane and nightshade so strong tonight it made her eyes water. "Why is he here, stepmother? Why would the Alpha King come to a forgotten place like this?" Alara's lips thinned. "The borderlands are restless. He hunts rogues and strengthens his claim. Our lands are on his path. It is a matter of politics, nothing more. It does not concern you." She gestured with the spoon. "Now drink. You must be calm and still tonight. You will sit at the end of the table, you will not speak unless spoken to, and you will keep your eyes down. You are a fragile human ward under my care. That is all he needs to know." The word human was a brand, pressed into her skin every day. She was the daughter of a wolf. Yet she had no wolf. She was told the fever that took her mother had burned the shifter from her blood, leaving only this weak, human shell. A defect, a shame, she drank. The liquid scorched a path down her throat, and the familiar lethargy began to seep into her veins almost immediately. The edges of the room softened. The ache in her soul dulled to a distant throb. She was becoming manageable again. Docile, empty. "Good girl," Alara murmured, taking the empty bowl. Her fingers brushed Marwen's cheek, the touch as cold as her voice. "Come, wear the gray linen. It is suitable. Suitable for a ghost, Marwyn thought, as she was led down to the great hall. The hall was ablaze with more candles than she had seen in years. They flickered against the faded tapestries depicting great hunts and ancient battles, making the woven wolves seem to writhe in the dancing light. A long table had been set with the finest silver, tarnished as it was, and the scent of roasted meat and mulled wine filled the air, heavy and cloying. The few household servants moved with a nervous, jerky energy, their eyes constantly darting towards the massive oak doors. Marwyn was placed at the farthest end of the table, a shadow among shadows, just as Alara had commanded. From here, she could see her stepmother take her seat near the head, her posture impossibly straight, a queen presiding over a crumbling kingdom. The waiting was the worst part. The air grew thick, heavy with anticipation. It felt like the moment before a lightning strike, the world holding its breath. Then the sound came, not a knock, but the deep, groaning shudder of the main gates being thrown open. Heavy, booted footsteps echoed in the courtyard. A collective inhale seemed to pass through the hall. Ilara's hands clasped in her lap, her only sign of tension. The oak doors to the great hall swung inward, propelled by two of the king's guards. They moved with a lethal grace, their eyes scanning every corner before they stepped aside. And then he entered. The whispers, the rumors, the fear, none of it had prepared her. King Corvin Dathir was not a man. He was a force of nature. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of his entire kingdom. A dark, trimmed beard framed a jaw that looked carved from granite, and a web of fine, silvery scars traced a path from his temple down his cheek, disappearing into the high collar of his black leather tunic. One scar, thicker than the rest, cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent predatory glare. He moved with a predatory silence, his presence sucking all the warmth and sound from the room. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were the color of molten silver, ancient and intelligent, and they missed nothing. His scent hit her first, a wave of power that crashed over the smells of food and dust. It was the scent of a midnight forest, pine needles, cold stone, and the clean, sharp tang of a winter storm. Underneath it all was something darker, something primal and musky, the scent of a dominant, powerful alpha wolf. The fog in Marwyn's mind recoiled from it, but the thing that slept deep inside her, the thing she dreamed of, stirred. "Lady Alara," he said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated in Marwyn's bones. He gave a slight, formal nod, his silver eyes sweeping over her stepmother with a cool, assessing gaze. "Alpha King," Alara replied, rising with practiced grace. "You honor our humble home. Please join us. You and your men must be weary from your journey." Corvin's gaze moved past Alara, sweeping down the length of the table. It was a slow, deliberate inspection, the gaze of a predator surveying its territory. Servants bowed their heads, guards stiffened. Marwyn felt a desperate urge to shrink into herself, to become invisible, just as she'd been taught. She lowered her head, her hair falling like a curtain around her face, her heart hammering a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. But it was too late. She felt his eyes land on her. It wasn't a glance. It was a physical weight, a pressure that made the air in her lungs feel thin and hot. The fog in her mind, the dullness from the herbs, began to shred like mist in a gale. The room, which had been a soft-focus painting moments before, snapped into sharp, painful clarity. The flame of each candle was a tiny, roaring sun. The intricate carvings on the silver goblets were so clear she could trace them with her eyes. The scent of the king intensified, flooding her senses, overwhelming her. It wasn't just pine and storm anymore. It was something else, something that smelled like home, like destiny. A soundless gasp escaped her lips. She couldn't help it. She lifted her head, her eyes met his, and the world shattered. It was not a gentle awakening. It was a cataclysm. The spell that had held her captive her entire life didn't just break. It exploded. A bolt of white-hot energy shot through her, starting from the point of contact where their gazes locked and scorching a path through every nerve. It felt like lightning striking a dead tree, splintering it to the core. The bitter taste of the herbs in her mouth turned to ash. The weakness in her limbs was burned away by a sudden, violent surge of power. The silent, sleeping thing inside her didn't just stir. It roared. It was a howl of pure, unadulterated rage and freedom that echoed not in the hall, but in the deepest corners of her soul. Mine. The word wasn't hers. It was ancient, possessive, and utterly commanding. It was the voice of her wolf. Pain, blinding and absolute, ripped through her. It was 1,000 times worse than the weakness, a raw, tearing sensation as if her very bones were being broken and reset. Her back arched. A scream built in her throat, raw and real, but it caught, trapped behind years of forced silence. She saw Corvin's silver eyes widen, not just with surprise, but with utter, soul-shaking disbelief. He saw it. He felt it. The impossible scent that had just erupted from her, wild, ancient, and forbidden. The scent of a power that hadn't been seen in generations. "Marwyn!" Ilara's voice was a whip-crack of panic. She started to rise, her face a mask of fury and terror. But Marwyn couldn't hear her. The sounds of the hall were fading, replaced by a roaring in her ears, the thunderous beat of a heart that was no longer just human. Her vision swam. The faces around the table blurred into streaks of color. The only thing she could see clearly was him, the Alpha King, her anchor in a world that was tearing itself apart. He had taken a step towards her, his hand half raised, his expression one of savage conflict, between shock, instinct, and a dawning, terrifying reverence. She clutched at the table, her knuckles white. The wood groaned under a strength she had never possessed. The silver goblet beside her hand began to vibrate. She looked down and saw her own reflection in its polished surface, distorted and wavering. But for a fleeting, impossible second, the eyes that stared back at her were not her own pale green. They were molten gold, glowing with the light of the full moon and an ancient, untamable power. The goblet didn't just vibrate. It shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the stunned silence of the hall. Wine and silver shards sprayed across the table. The pain intensified, a fire in her blood, a scream in her bones. This wasn't an illness. This was a birth. A violent, agonizing rebirth. The last vestiges of Ilara's chemical chains dissolved, and the sheer, overwhelming force of what had been trapped inside her for 2 decades was unleashed all at once. It was too much. The power was too vast, her body too unprepared. Her strength gave out. With a choked cry, Marwyn slid from her chair, her body convulsing, and collapsed onto the cold stone floor. Her last conscious thought was of the scent of pine and winter storm, and the impossible sight of the feared Alpha King moving towards her, his silver eyes burning with a question that could remake the world. "What are you?" Darkness gave way to a splintered reality. Marwyn felt the cold first, seeping through the thin linen of her dress from the stone floor beneath her. Then came the sound, a cacophony that her newly awakened senses struggled to parse. The frantic, rabbit-fast heartbeats of the servants, the low, steady thunder of the king's guards, the sharp, panicked breaths of her stepmother, and beneath it all, a sound so profound it felt like the turning of the world itself, the slow, powerful drum of the Alpha King's heart. He was kneeling over her. His shadow fell across her body, a shield from the flickering candlelight. That scent, pine, storm, and the raw power of the wild, was a vortex pulling her back from the edge of unconsciousness. It didn't frighten her. It centered her. "King," a new voice whispered in the depths of her mind. It was her own, yet not. It was deep, ancient, and resonant with power. It was the voice of her wolf, awake for the first time, and it spoke with absolute certainty. Ours. A hand, large and calloused, gently touched her forehead, brushing away a strand of damp hair. The touch was electric, a jolt of warmth and raw energy that chased away the last of the cold. Her eyes fluttered open. She was looking up into the molten silver gaze of Corvin de Thier. The predatory sharpness was gone, replaced by a storm of disbelief, awe, and a fierce, burgeoning possession. "Stay back," he commanded, his voice a low growl not directed at her, but at the room at large. His men, without a word, shifted, their bodies forming a living wall around them, separating them from the rest of the hall. "Your Majesty, she is ill!" Ilara's voice cut through the air, sharp with manufactured concern that couldn't quite hide the raw terror beneath. "It is a seizure from her condition. She has been this way since she was a child. Allow me to take her to her room." Corvin didn't look at Ilara. His gaze remained locked on Marwyn, watching the faint residual glow of gold fade from her eyes, leaving them a startled, luminous green. He inhaled slowly, deeply, as if tasting the very air around her. His expression hardened, the lines around his eyes and mouth tightening into a mask of cold fury. Her condition, he repeated, the words laced with a deadly softness, was a lie. He finally turned his head, and the sheer force of his glare made Alara physically recoil. I smell it on her. Wolfsbane, nightshade, a cocktail of poisons meant to suppress, to bind, to slowly kill the wolf within. You have been feeding this to her for years. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Alara's face went white as bone. I would never. It is medicine, to keep her human blood from souring. Silence, Corvin commanded, and the word was not a request. It was an absolute, the kind of command that shifters were born to obey. The hall fell utterly still. Even the candle flames seemed to cease their flickering. He looked back down at Marwyn, his silver eyes searching hers. She is no more human than I am. But her wolf, it is something else entirely. The scent rolling off her was intoxicating, a drug to his primal senses. It wasn't the scent of an omega, or a beta, or even a common alpha. It was ancient, pure, and terrifyingly powerful. It smelled of ozone after a lightning strike, of deep earth that had never seen the sun, of moonlight given form. It was the scent of the first blood, the scent of prophecy. With a fluid grace that belied his size, Corvin slid one arm beneath Marwyn's shoulders and the other under her knees. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The world tilted, and suddenly she was cradled against a chest, as hard and unyielding as a mountainside. His warmth enveloped her, a stark contrast to the lifetime of cold she had known. The fabric of his tunic was rough against her cheek, the scent of him was overwhelming, and the steady beat of his heart against her ear was the most reassuring sound she had ever heard. The wolf inside her purred, a low, contented rumble that vibrated through her own chest. For the first time in her life, she felt safe, utterly and completely safe. He stood, turning his back on Alara and the gawking court. "Seize the woman who calls herself Lady Talreath," he ordered to his captain, a grim-faced wolf with a scar that mirrored his king's. "Tear this house apart, find every vial, every pua, every herb, every book she used for this abomination. She will be taken to the Dathir Keep for questioning." "No!" Alara shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "You can't. She is nothing, a disgraced Luna's half-breed pup. She is broken." Corvin paused at the doorway, his back still to her. "You took a queen," he said, his voice dangerously low, "and tried to turn her into a ghost. You will answer for it." He carried Marwyn from the oppressive heat of the great hall into a cool stone corridor. His long strides were smooth and silent. Away from the prying eyes, some of the rigid control seemed to leave him. He adjusted his hold on her, pulling her closer, tucking her head more securely into the crook of his neck. He breathed her in again, a deep, shuddering inhalation. Marwyn felt a tremor run through his powerful frame. It wasn't weakness. It was a reaction to her, to the scent, to the impossible reality of her existence. She risked a glance up at his face. His jaw was clenched. His silver eyes were fixed on the corridor ahead, but they were distant, seeing something far beyond the stone walls. He carried her up a winding staircase and into a chamber she had never been allowed to enter, Alara's personal study. He ignored the ornate desk and velvet chairs, kicking the door shut behind him and laying her gently on a plush chaise lounge near the hearth. He straightened up, but he didn't move away. He stood over her, a formidable guardian, his presence filling the small room, making it his own. For a long moment, he just looked at her. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken questions. He was a king, a warrior, a man burdened by duty and scarred by battle. And in his eyes, she saw the weight of 1,000 decisions. But as he looked at her, she saw something new flicker to life, a primal, protective instinct that was more powerful than any crown. Her own body was a foreign country. A strange, thrumming energy hummed beneath her skin. Her hearing was so sharp she could hear a mouse skittering behind the wall. The scent of old paper from the books, the lingering perfume of Alara, and most of all, the clean, wild scent of him, were a symphony of information her brain was struggling to process. The fog was gone. The world was painfully, beautifully real. "What is your name?" he asked. his voice softer now, stripped of its command. Her throat was dry. Her vocal cords felt stiff from disuse. She had rarely been required to speak more than a few words at a time. "Marwyn," she whispered, and the sound was a fragile, rusty thing. "Marwyn," he repeated, tasting the name. It sounded different in his mouth, stronger. "My name is Corvin." She knew. The entire world knew his name. She nodded, her eyes still wide. He crouched down beside the chaise lounge, bringing himself to her level. It was a gesture of immense control for an alpha of his power, a deliberate relinquishing of dominance. "What you experienced, that was your wolf waking up. Do you understand?" She nodded again, swallowing hard. I thought I didn't have one." She said it was burned out of me. Corvin's hand clenched into a fist at his side. She lied. She didn't burn it out. She chained it, poisoned it into slumber. For a wolf to be suppressed for so long, the awakening— He shook his head, a flicker of awe in his eyes. "It should have killed you, or driven you mad." "I dreamed," Marwyn confessed, the words tumbling out in a soft rush. "Every night I dreamed I was running. I could feel the wind and the earth. I could hear the pack howling. But I couldn't howl with them." A muscle feathered in his jaw. "That was your wolf, fighting to be free." His gaze was intense, searching. "Marwyn, you're sent. It is not like the others. It is old from the ancient lines." She didn't understand. She only knew that when he looked at her, the wolf inside her rose to meet his gaze, without fear, without submission. There was an equilibrium between them, an impossible balance of power that defied all pack law. He was king, but she was something else. He reached out, his fingers hesitating for a second before gently tracing the line of her jaw. His thumb was calloused, rough against her soft skin, but the touch was reverent. Her skin tingled, and a deep, unfamiliar warmth pooled in her belly. Her wolf sighed in contentment, recognizing the touch of its mate. The thought was so sudden, so absolute, it stole her breath. Mate. The word echoed in her soul with the weight of truth. Corvin's silver eyes darkened, as if he had heard the thought, as if he felt the bond snap into place between them, just as she had. He pulled his hand back as if burned. He stood abruptly, turning away from her and pacing to the window, staring out into the night. "The Talreath lands are no longer safe for you," he said, his back to her. His voice was rougher now, strained. "Your stepmother has allies. Others who believe the lie and would see you remain a ghost. Others who would fear what you are." "What am I?" she asked, her new voice gaining a sliver of strength. He turned back, his face a conflict of duty and a raw, undeniable desire. "You are the heir to a power we thought was lost to the ages. You are a living prophecy, and right now, you are a target." He walked back toward her, his decision made. The king was back in his eyes, resolute and unyielding. "You will come with me," he stated, the words an unbreakable vow. "To the Dathir Keep. You will be under my personal protection. I will find out who aided your stepmother in this, and I will teach you to control the power that now flows through your veins." He stood before her, offering not a choice, but a new reality. Her life in the crumbling manor was over. The years of weakness, silence, and shame were gone, burned away in the fire of her awakening. Before her stood a king, a kingdom, and a destiny she could not yet comprehend. But looking into his eyes, she knew that leaving with him was the only choice that mattered. "You belong to the crown now, Marwyn," he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble that vibrated through the floor and up into her very bones. "And I protect what is mine." The world outside her prison was a wild, breathing thing. Marwyn was seated before King Corvin on his massive black warhorse, the beast's powerful muscles moving like rolling thunder beneath them. Corvin's body was a wall of heat and strength at her back, one arm a steel band around her waist, holding her securely against him. The position was intimate, a public declaration of possession that sent a fresh wave of tremors through her newly awakened system. His scent was her entire world now, pine storm and the clean, sharp smell of cold iron from his leather tunic. It was a fortress against the overwhelming sensory assault of her new reality. For the first time, she felt the kiss of a real wind on her face, untamed by glass and stone. It carried 1,000 scents she had only ever dreamed of. The damp, loamy perfume of the forest floor, the sharp tang of sap from a broken branch, the distant, musky trail of a deer. Her hearing was a curse and a blessing. She could hear the rhythmic sigh of the horse's breathing, the creak of saddle leather, and the individual heartbeats of the 20 guards who formed their escort, each a unique rhythm of loyalty, weariness, or fear. It was too much. A symphony played at a deafening volume. She instinctively pressed back against Corvin's chest, seeking the solid, steady beat of his heart to anchor herself. He must have felt her distress. The arm around her waist tightened fractionally, a silent message of reassurance. "Breathe slowly," his voice rumbled, the vibration traveling directly from his chest into her spine. "Focus on one thing, the sound of my heart, the feel of the horse. Block out the rest. Your senses are a wild river right now. You must learn to build a dam." She closed her eyes, trying to obey. She focused on the steady thump-thump that was the center of her new universe. The chaos receded, not disappearing, but moving to the periphery. Like a storm heard from inside a sturdy house, she opened her eyes again. The moon was a silver sickle, hanging in an ink-black sky, illuminating a world of stark, beautiful brutality. The Talrith lands had been soft, decaying, draped in ivy and mist. Corvan's kingdom was forged from harder stuff. Jagged rocks clawed their way out of the earth like broken teeth, and ancient, gnarled trees stood like sentinels on the ridges, their branches twisted by a relentless wind. This was a land that did not offer comfort. It demanded strength. It was a kingdom of scars, just like its king. They rode for hours, the pace swift and unrelenting. Marwyn felt the bone-deep weariness of a body still reeling from a lifetime of poison and the violent shock of its rebirth. Yet, beneath the fatigue, a new strength was gathering, a deep well of energy she had never known. Her wolf was awake, watching the world through her eyes with a fierce, primal curiosity. It recognized this land. It felt the power humming in the very soil. This was its territory. As true night fell, the captain, Kael, rode up alongside them. "My king, we should make camp. The horses need rest, and she does too." His gaze flickered to Marwyn, a mixture of awe and professional concern. Corvin nodded, his eyes scanning the dense woods ahead. "There is a hunter's lean-to a mile north of here, by the Black Creek. It will offer some shelter. We will rest there until dawn." The lean-to was little more than a crude structure of logs and turf, but it was blessedly out of the wind. A fire was quickly built, its crackling flames pushing back the oppressive darkness and painting the grim faces of Corvin's guards in dancing shades of orange and red. They moved with an economy of motion, a pack that understood its hierarchy perfectly. Their deference to their king was absolute, but Marwyn noticed something else in their glances toward her. It wasn't hostility. It was a deep, instinctual reverence, tinged with fear. They could smell what she was, or rather, what they thought she was. Corvin slid from the horse and lifted her down, his hands lingering at her waist for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Her legs felt unsteady, and she swayed against him. He steadied her, his grip firm. "You need to eat." He led her to the fire and handed her a piece of dried meat and a water skin. The food was tough and salty, but it tasted more real than anything Alara's cook had ever prepared. It tasted of survival. As she ate, she watched him. He wasn't resting. He moved around the perimeter of the small camp, speaking in low tones to Kael, his silver eyes constantly scanning the dark woods around them. He was a caged predator, coiled with an energy that promised swift, lethal violence to any threat. He was protecting her, and the intensity of his focus was a palpable force. Later, as the cold deepened, he brought a heavy fur cloak and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of him, of leather and winter, and she gratefully pulled it tighter, the scent a comfort against the strange new world. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed. The rest of the guards had purposefully given them a wide berth, creating a small island of intimacy in the wilderness. "The Dathir Keep is another half-day's ride," he said, his voice a low rumble beside her ear. "It is not a gentle place. My court is forged from war and necessity. They will see your power before they see you. They will fear you." "Why?" she whispered, looking into the flames. "What am I to them?" He was silent for a long moment, choosing his words. There are old stories, prophecies, of a wolf with the scent of the first blood, an ancient power born in a time when the moon itself was said to walk the earth, a power that could either unite the packs into an unshakable empire or shatter them into dust. He turned his head, his silver gaze pinning her. They will smell that prophecy on you, Marwyn, and they will wonder if you have come to save them or destroy them. The weight of his words was staggering. A queen, he had called her. A prophecy. It was too much to reconcile with the ghost she had been for 20 years. She looked at his face, at the web of scars illuminated by the fire. They didn't mar his features. They defined them. They were a map of his life, of his reign. Your scars, she found herself saying, the question leaving her lips before she could stop it. Do they pain you? A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. They are a part of me. The one on my brow is from a rogue alpha challenge, when I was young. This one, he traced the long, silvery line on his cheek with a fingertip, is from a human hunter's silver knife, a reminder that our greatest threats do not always have claws. His expression hardened, his eyes becoming distant and cold. The others are from battles best forgotten. His honesty, guarded as it was a gift. It forged a connection between them in the quiet dark. She felt a sudden, fierce urge to reach out, to trace the scar on his cheek as he had, to understand the pain that had carved him into the man he was. He was a king built from hardship, and she was a wolf born from poison and lies. Perhaps they were not so different. He saw the shift in her eyes, the dawning empathy. His own gaze softened, the silver of his eyes warming to the color of pewter. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The most dangerous scars are the ones no one can see, Marwyn. You carry them too, but I promise you, no one will ever harm you again. Not while I draw breath. The vow hung in the air between them, thick with a power that went beyond a king's decree. It was the promise of a wolf to its mate. The world narrowed to the space between their faces, the crackling of the fire, the scent of pine, and the overwhelming pull that drew them closer. His gaze dropped to her lips. Her own breath hitched. The wolf inside her was screaming a single possessive word. Mine. The moment was shattered by a sharp whistle from the darkness, a scout's signal. Corvin was on his feet in an instant, the warrior king replacing the confidant. Kyle was at his side, his hand on the hilt of his sword. What is it? Corvin growled. Riders, your majesty, the scout reported, melting out of the trees. Not rogues. They bear the sigil of Lord Vorlog. They ride for the keep with haste. Corvin's jaw tightened, and a cold light entered his eyes. Vorlog. He moves quickly. He looked back at Marwyn, his expression unreadable. My cousin. He is the alpha of the Northern Territories, and he questions every move I make. The rest of the night passed in a tense quiet. The intimacy was gone, replaced by the grim reality of politics and power. When they arrived at the Dother Keep the next afternoon, Marwyn understood the source of Corvin's strength. The keep wasn't built upon a mountain. It seemed to grow from it, a fortress of black, jagged stone that scraped at the sky. It was intimidating, unbreachable, and utterly wild. As they rode through the massive iron-bound gates, the entire court was assembled in the main bailey. Hundreds of shifters, from high-born alphas in fine leathers to grim-faced betas in mail, stood in silence. Their eyes were 1,000 points of light, all fixed on her. The collective weight of their stares was a physical blow. She could smell their emotions. Suspicion, fear, curiosity, and from a powerful few, a sharp, undisguised hostility. A tall, powerfully built shifter stepped forward from the crowd. He had the same dark hair as Corvin, but his eyes were a cold, hard granite, and his face was clean-shaven, revealing a cruel twist to his mouth. His scent was of cold air and ambition. Lord Vorlog. He bowed his head, a gesture of respect that held no warmth. My king, you returned sooner than expected. His eyes slid from Corvin to Marwyn, and his lip curled in a faint sneer. He sniffed the air, his pupils dilating as he caught her scent. The sneer vanished, replaced by a flicker of shock, then a calculating gleam. You bring an unknown power into our heart. A scent of myth and ruin, Vorlog declared, his voice ringing across the silent courtyard, a direct challenge for all to hear. Tell us, cousin, is she a weapon you mean to wield, or is she the omen of our end? Corvin dismounted in one fluid motion, his feet hitting the cobblestones with a solid grounding sound. He did not immediately answer Vorlog's challenge. Instead, he turned and reached up for Marwyn. His hands spanned her waist, strong and sure, and he lifted her down from the warhorse. He did not release her at once. He kept her standing before him, his hands resting on her hips, his body a formidable shield at her back. It was a silent, unambiguous statement to the entire court. She is with me. She is under my protection. A challenge to her is a challenge to me. The air in the bailey was thick enough to taste, a mix of ozone from so many powerful auras, the cold scent of stone, and the sharp, metallic tang of fear. Marwyn felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on her, stripping her bare, judging the frayed linen of her dress, the wildness in her eyes, the impossible scent that clung to her like a shroud. The chaotic noise of so many minds, so many heartbeats, threatened to overwhelm her again. She instinctively reached back, her fingers finding and gripping the hard leather of Corvin's tunic. The simple contact was an anchor in the storm. "She is Marwyn Talrith," Corvin announced, his voice echoing off the black stone walls, carrying the undisputed authority of the Alpha King. "Daughter of the late Luna Elise of the Silverwood Pack. She is my ward, and she will be treated with the respect due to one under my personal banner. Her nature is a matter for the crown, Vorlog, not for courtyard theatrics." Vorlog's granite eyes narrowed. He took a deliberate step closer, his gaze sweeping over Marwyn with a cold, invasive appraisal. He was close enough now that she could smell the raw ambition on him, a scent like cold steel and bitter frost. Her wolf, still a raw and untamed thing inside her, bristled at his proximity. A low, warning rumble started deep in her chest, a sound she didn't know she was capable of making. It was quiet, barely audible, but in the dead silence of the bailey, it was as clear as a scream. Vorlog froze. A flicker of genuine surprise, and perhaps a sliver of fear, crossed his face. He had expected a frightened girl, a pawn. He had not expected this primal assertion of presence from a creature who looked so fragile. Corvin's hand on her hip tightened, a subtle command for calm. He then met his cousin's gaze, his own silver eyes turning to ice. "My ward is weary from her journey. She requires rest, not interrogation." He raised his voice slightly, addressing the crowd. "You will all return to your duties. The king has returned. That is all you need to know." The command was absolute. The assembled shifters, their curiosity still burning, bowed their heads in deference and began to disperse, their whispers following them like the rustling of dry leaves. Vorlog held Corvin's gaze for a moment longer, a silent battle of wills, before giving a stiff, almost insolent nod and melting back into the crowd. The threat, though unspoken, lingered in the air. "Come," Corvin murmured, his voice for her ears alone. He finally released her, but his hand moved to the small of her back, a guiding, possessive pressure that steered her away from the prying eyes and into the vast, echoing entrance of the keep. The inside of Dathir Keep was a world of shadows and stone. Torches hissed in iron sconces, casting long, dancing shadows that made the hallways feel alive. Faded tapestries depicting the bloody history of the Dathir line hung from the walls, their woven wolves seeming to snarl in the flickering light. Unlike the crumbling elegance of the Talrith estate, everything here was built for war and survival. It was functional, brutal, and possessed a stark, uncompromising beauty. It was the heart of Corvin's power, and it beat with a slow, formidable rhythm. He led her through a labyrinth of corridors, up a wide, winding staircase, and into a wing of the keep that was quieter, more private. The guards they passed flattened themselves against the walls, their heads bowed, their eyes averted. No one dared to stare at her now. The king's silent declaration in the bailey had been understood. He stopped before a heavy iron-strapped oak door and pushed it open. "These will be your chambers. You will be safe here." The room was larger than any she had ever known. A massive bed, carved with wolves and ravens, dominated one wall, piled high with dark fur blankets. A huge unlit fireplace, large enough for a man to stand in, promised warmth against the mountain's chill. Tall arched windows, free of ivy, looked out over a sheer drop, offering a breathtaking, terrifying view of the jagged peaks and endless forests of Corvin's domain. It was a luxurious cage, beautiful and secure. An elderly she-wolf with kind, crinkling eyes and hair the color of spun silver was waiting inside, her hands clasped before her. She bowed deeply. "Your Majesty." "Goethe," Corvin acknowledged with a nod. "This is Marwen. She is to be cared for. See that she has a hot bath, food, and clothes. Whatever she requires, she is to have. No one is to enter these chambers without my express permission. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, my king," Gerda said, her warm, curious gaze falling on Marwen. Her scent was of hearth smoke, chamomile, and old, unwavering loyalty. Marwen felt an immediate sense of ease in her presence. Corvin turned to Marwen. The harsh lines of the king softened slightly as he looked at her. "I have matters to attend to. Vorlog's premature arrival is not a coincidence, and I must begin the interrogation of your stepmother." The name, Alara, sent a shiver of cold dread through her. The memory of the silver spoon, the bitter herbs, the cold touch. What will you do to her?" Corvin's face became a mask of stone. "I will get the truth, the names of her allies, the full extent of her treason. She attempted to destroy a power sacred to our people. She will be shown the mercy she deserves." His tone left no doubt that mercy would be a scarce commodity. He hesitated, as if wanting to say more, to offer a comfort he didn't know how to articulate. He settled for a single gruff command. "Rest, Marwen. We will speak on the morrow." He turned and left, the heavy door closing behind him with a definitive thud. The sound of a bolt being shot from the outside echoed in the sudden silence. She was a guest, a ward, and a prisoner. Goethe's presence was a quiet comfort. She moved with a gentle efficiency, her movements slow and deliberate. She helped Marwen out of the travel-stained gray linen, her touch respectful and kind. As the dress came off, Gerda's breath caught. She was staring at Marwen's back, at her shoulders. "What is it?" Marwen asked, trying to look over her shoulder. "The mark," Gerda whispered, her voice filled with an almost religious awe. "It is as the prophecies foretold." Confused, Marwen moved to a large, polished silver mirror that hung on the wall. She turned her back to it, craning her neck, and then she saw it. Just between her shoulder blades, where the skin was pale and unblemished, was a birthmark she had never seen before. It must have been suppressed by the herbs, invisible until now. It was a faint silvery tracery, like a tattoo made of moonlight, in the shape of a perfect, intricate snowflake. But as she stared, she realized it wasn't a snowflake. It was a tricrescent moon, an ancient symbol of the first Luna, the mother of all their kind. "The mark of the Winter Queen," Goethe breathed, her eyes wide. "The one who will unite the fractured lands under a silver throne." Marwen stared at her reflection, at the impossible mark on her skin, at the wildness in her eyes. Marwen Talrith, the weak human ward, was gone. In her place was this stranger, this creature of myth and prophecy, the Winter Queen. It was too much. The room began to spin. Goethe saw her distress and quickly guided her toward the steaming bath she had prepared. The hot water was a shock, a balm, a blessing. As she sank into it, the grime and dust of the road washed away, but the weight of her new identity remained. Goethe gently washed her hair, her hands surprisingly strong, her silence a comfortable blanket. Later, wrapped in a soft robe of dark wool, Marwen sat by the fire while Goethe brushed her long, damp hair. The old wolf began to speak, her voice a low, soothing hum. She spoke of the court, of the factions that vied for the king's ear. She spoke of Lord Vorlog, whose northern pack was notoriously savage and traditionalist, and who saw Corvin's attempts to forge treaties with the borderland humans as a sign of weakness. She spoke of the king himself, of the burden he carried since his father's death in the Great Rogue War, of the scars he carried both inside and out. "He has ruled alone for a decade," Goethe said, her brush moving in slow, rhythmic strokes. "He has held this kingdom together with nothing but will and iron. He has never softened. Not for anyone." She paused, her eyes meeting Marwen's in the mirror. "Until now." The implication hung in the warm air between them. Marwen felt a flush rise to her cheeks. The bond she felt with Corvin was more than a king's protection, more than a prophesied destiny. It was a primal, undeniable pull, a magnetic force that hummed between them. Her wolf knew what it was. Her human heart was just beginning to understand. A sharp knock at the door startled them both. Goethe moved to answer it, unbolting the heavy lock. It was Kale, the captain of the guard. He carried a covered silver tray. "The king sent this for Lady Marwyn," he said, his face impassive, but his eyes held a deep, unwavering respect as he looked at her. He said she must eat to regain her strength. The tray held roasted chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and a goblet of deep red wine. It was a king's meal. But tucked beside the plate was something else, a single, perfect white flower, a moon-petal blossom which only grew on the highest, most inaccessible cliffs of the Dothir Mountains. It was a flower of breathtaking rarity and beauty, said to only bloom under the light of a full moon. It was a silent offering, a courtship gift, a confession. Marwyn picked up the flower, its petals as soft and cool as silk against her fingertips. Its scent was faint, sweet, and intoxicating. As she held it, a strange, dizzying sensation washed over her. It wasn't a weakness like the herbs had caused. It was a vision. The room dissolved around her. She was no longer in the keep. She was standing in a dark, damp dungeon. Alara was chained to the wall, her face bruised and defiant. Corvin stood before her, his expression a thunderous mask. "Who else knows of the prophecy?" Corvin's voice echoed in her mind, not as a memory, but as if he were speaking it now. "Who helped you keep her hidden?" Alara spat at his feet. "You think you have won, Dothir? You think you can control her? That power is not meant to be controlled. It is a fire that will consume you all. Lord Vorlog knows. He has always known. He was waiting for the right moment to claim her for himself, to use her to shatter your throne. You haven't saved a queen, you foolish boy. You have simply brought the war to your own doorstep." The vision shattered. Marwyn gasped, dropping the flower, her heart hammering in her chest. Vorlog knew. He didn't just see a strange girl with a powerful scent. He saw a tool, a weapon to be used against his own cousin. She was not a ward in a protected chamber. She was the prize in a war that had just begun. And in the center of the keep, in the dungeons below, the king had just learned that the greatest threat to his kingdom and to his prophesied queen was sleeping just down the hall. The knowledge was a shard of ice in Marwyn's gut. Vorlog knew. He wasn't just an ambitious rival, he was a conspirator. He hadn't been waiting for a moment of political weakness, he had been waiting for her. The vision, a terrifying and unexpected gift of her awakened senses, had stripped away all pretense of safety. The stone walls of her chamber were not a shield. They were the center of a chessboard, and she was the piece everyone was moving to capture. She stared at the fallen moon-petal blossom, its perfect white petals bruised against the cold stone floor, a gift of courtship from a king who was, at this very moment, discovering the depth of the betrayal coiled in the heart of his own keep. Panic, a cold and familiar reptile, slithered up her spine. The urge to hide, to shrink, to become the ghost Alara had made her, was a powerful ingrained instinct. For a moment, she was back in the dusty, ivy-choked room of her youth, a fragile thing waiting for the world to pass her by. But then the wolf stirred. It rose within her, a tide of liquid fire, burning away the icy fear. It was a primal, incandescent rage. She had been caged, poisoned, and lied to for 20 years. She had been made weak. Now, free, she was being seen as a weapon, a prize, a prophecy to be wielded. She was still not being seen as herself. The rage did not make her tremble, it made her still. It forged a core of pure, unbending steel, where before there had been only fog and weakness. Goethe, seeing the cataclysmic shift in Marwyn's eyes, the flicker of molten gold, the sudden sharp focus, took an instinctive step back. "My lady," Marwyn stood up, the wool robe falling around her like a royal mantle. Her movements were no longer hesitant or fragile. They were fluid, deliberate, imbued with a grace and power that had been sleeping for 2 decades. "Goethe," she said, her voice low and clear, holding a new timbre of command that made the old wolf straighten her spine in response. "Tell me about the passages, the old ways, the ones the servants use." Goethe's eyes widened. "My lady, the king forbade anyone from—" "The king is dealing with a traitor in his dungeons," Marwyn interrupted, her gaze unwavering. "He is about to discover that another traitor sleeps in his halls. He will be walking into a trap. I will not be a pawn in Vorlog's game, nor will I be a damsel locked in a tower waiting for a king to save her." She walked to the window, placing her hand against the cold glass. looking out at the vast, moonlit kingdom of stone and shadow. This court whispers, I need to learn its language. A slow, profound understanding dawned on Gerda's face. She saw not a frightened girl, but the queen of the prophecy, awakening to her power. The old wolf's loyalty to Corvin was absolute, but her reverence for the prophecy, for the symbol on Marwen's back, was something far older, far deeper. She gave a single, decisive nod. There is a tapestry in the alcove, Gerda said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The one depicting the winter hunt of the first king. His spear points to a loose stone. It leads to the kitchens, the armory, everywhere, if you know the paths. While Gerda retrieved a simple dark dress and practical leather boots, Marwen's mind raced. Her new senses, which had been an overwhelming burden, were now her greatest weapon. She had to learn to control them, to focus them. She closed her eyes, just as Corvin had taught her. Focus on one thing. She pushed past the sense of the room, the flower, the food, the old stone, and reached further. She sought the cold, ambitious scent of Lord Vorlog. It took a moment of intense concentration, a painful filtering of 1,000 other smells, but then she found it. A trail like a thread of frost in the air, leading from the main hall to a secluded tower on the northern side of the keep. He was in his chambers, and he was not alone. Dressed in the simple, anonymous dark clothes, her hair braided tightly back, Marwen was a shadow. Gerda pulled back the heavy tapestry, her old hands surprisingly strong as she worked the stone loose. A gust of cool, damp air smelling of earth and mice wafted out from the darkness. Be careful, my queen, Gerda whispered, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and fierce pride. The stones have ears, but they also have teeth. Marwen gave her a grateful look, then slipped into the narrow passage, pulling the stone closed behind her. The darkness was absolute, but for her new vision, it was merely a deep twilight. She could see the rough texture of the stone, the faint shimmer of moisture on the walls. She moved silently, her soft boots making no sound. The passages were a secret map of the keep's lifeblood. She could hear the clatter of pots from the kitchens below, the murmur of guardsmen in a nearby barracks, the distant lonely howl of a wolf on the mountain. She followed the scent of frost and steel, navigating the maze-like corridors with an instinct she didn't know she possessed. Her wolf guided her, its paws sure on the unseen path. Finally, the scent grew strong, overpowering. It was coming from above. A faint sliver of torchlight bled through a crack in the ceiling, a spy hole, cleverly disguised as a knot in the wooden timbers. Marwen pressed her eye to the opening. She was looking down into Lord Vorlog's private study. He was standing by a massive fireplace, a goblet of wine in his hand. And with him were 2 other alphas, powerful, grim-faced lords from other territories, their sigils embroidered on their tunics. They were 2 of the most powerful members of Corvin's own council. He has her, Vorlog was saying, his voice a low, triumphant growl. He brought her here, just as the witch said he would. He thinks he's found a weapon to unite the kingdom, the fool. He's brought us the key to his own undoing. One of the lords, a hulking brute with a scarred face, shifted nervously. The scent on her, Vorlog. It is the true blood, the old power. The legends say what we want them to say, Vorlog snapped, slamming his goblet down. She is a girl who has been weak and drugged her whole life. Her power is a wild, untamed thing. She cannot control it, but I can. When I take her as my mate, her power will be bound to my bloodline. The prophecy will be fulfilled through me. The Pax will see a true, strong alpha with the Winter Queen at his side, not a king who sues for peace with humans and coddles the weak. Marwen's blood ran cold. Take her as his mate. The sheer arrogance, the possessive cruelty of the words, ignited the fire in her veins. He didn't want her. He wanted what she represented. And what of Corvin? The second lord asked, his voice thin and reedy. Vorlog smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. My dear cousin is currently occupied with a piece of our little puzzle. The stepmother will tell him everything I want him to know. She will tell him that I am his enemy. He will come for me full of righteous fury. But he will expect a duel of honor, a challenge in the old way. Vorlog picked up a small, ornate box from the mantel. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a sliver of wood, dark and oily. He will not be expecting this. A sliver from the blackwood thorn. It does not kill, it paralyzes. Rips the wolf from the man, leaving him a helpless human shell. By the time he recovers, I will have the girl, the loyalty of his council, and his throne. Marwen pulled back from the spy hole, her heart pounding a frantic war drum against her ribs. This was no mere political coup. It was a meticulously planned assassination. A trap was being set, and Corvin, driven by the revelations from Alara, was about to walk right into it. She had to warn him. She fled back through the passages, her mind a maelstrom of terror and desperate calculation. She could not simply run to him. Vorlog's men would be watching. Any direct approach would seem like a setup. She had to be smarter. She had to use the court's own language, secrets and symbols. She burst back into her chambers, startling Gerda. "The moon petal blossom," she said, her voice urgent. "Does it have a meaning in the court?" Gerda's eyes lit with understanding. "It is the king's flower, a symbol of his line. To give it is a sign of highest favor. To return it is a rejection," Marwen finished. "A grave insult." "Yes," Gerda breathed. "It would demand an immediate personal response from the king himself." It was a desperate gamble, a public slap in the face. It would enrage Corvin, wound his pride, but it would bring him to her, alone. It was the only way she could think of to divert him from his path to Vorlog's tower. "Get it," Marwen commanded, "and find Captain Kael. Tell him I must see the king immediately, that I am displeased." The plan was a terrible one, built on pride and emotion, but it was all she had. Kael arrived minutes later, his face a mask of confusion and concern. Marwen stood tall, her features set in a cold, imperious mask she had learned from years of watching Alara. She held the bruised blossom in her hand. "Captain," she said, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't feel, "take this back to your king. Tell him his welcome has been found wanting. Tell him I will not be wooed by trinkets while my life is debated in his halls like a contract for lumber. If he wishes to speak with his ward, he will come here, now." Kael stared, stunned by her audacity. He saw the flower, understood the gravity of the insult. He bowed low, a new, deeper respect in his eyes. He took the flower and was gone. Marwen stood in the center of the room, her hands clenched, every muscle in her body screaming with tension. She was playing a game she didn't understand, with rules she was inventing as she went. She was banking everything on the fragile, unspoken bond between her and a king she barely knew. She listened, her senses stretched to their absolute limit, trying to hear his approach, trying to gauge his fury. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Then she heard it. Heavy, furious footsteps echoing down the corridor. No deference, no royal procession. This was the stride of an enraged alpha. The bolt on her door was thrown back with a deafening crash. The door slammed open, hitting the stone wall with a crack like thunder. Corvin stood there, his silver eyes blazing with a cold, white-hot fury. He was magnificent in his rage, a storm given human form. The bruised flower was clutched in his fist. "What is the meaning of this?" he growled, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that shook the very foundations of the room. He strode toward her, his power rolling off him in suffocating waves. "You dare to insult my name, my gift, in my own keep?" He stopped directly in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. This was it, the moment of truth. She had his undivided, furious attention. She met his blazing gaze, her own heart hammering, and opened her mouth to warn him of the trap, of the poison, of the traitors in his council. But before she could speak a single word, he reached out, his hand tangling in her braid, and pulled her to him. His other hand snaked around her waist, locking her against his unyielding body. His head descended, his furious eyes never leaving hers. "You want my attention, little queen?" he snarled, his lips just a breath from hers. "You have it." And then his mouth crashed down on hers. 2 full moons had waxed and waned, scattering silver light across the snow-dusted peaks of the Dothir Mountains. The great hall, once a place of shadows and fear, felt different now. The air was still charged with power, but it was a steady, humming energy, not the sharp, nervous tension of a court divided. At the head of the hall, Where a single grim throne of black iron had once stood, there were now two. Corvin's throne remained, but beside it, carved from the pale, ancient heartwood of a weirwood tree and inlaid with silver, was a throne for his queen. Marwen sat upon it, not as a fragile ward, but as a ruler. She wore a gown the color of a winter sky, her hair held back by a simple silver circlet. The snowflake-shaped mark between her shoulders was no longer a secret, but a known symbol of her authority. The whispers in the court had not ceased, but their nature had changed. They were no longer whispers of fear, but of awe. They spoke of the night the king's hand, Lord Vorlog, had laid a trap, and how the silent, unknown girl had unraveled it with a single brilliant move. They spoke of how the king, forewarned, had not gone to his cousin's tower in a blind rage. Instead, he had summoned the entire court to the Great Hall under the pretense of an emergency council. He had let Vorlog and the two traitorous lords walk into the center of the room, surrounded by loyal guards, before he revealed the sliver of blackwood thorn he'd had Kyle retrieve from the tower. The traitors' guilt was written on their faces before their treason was ever spoken aloud. There was no battle, no bloody coup, just a swift, cold, and absolute political execution. Vorlog was stripped of his titles and exiled to the Wailing Peaks, a barren wasteland from which no one ever returned. The other lords forfeited their lands and their lives. The court had been purged by a fire both hot and cold. Now, an alpha from the Sunstone Pack, a territory on the southern border, knelt before them. "Your Majesties," he pleaded, his voice rough with anxiety. "The human settlers press further into our hunting grounds. They fell our trees, they divert our water. My wolves grow hungry and restless. A conflict is inevitable." Corvin leaned forward, his expression grim, the old instincts of the solitary warrior king rising to the surface. "The treaty lines are clear. If they have crossed them, you have my leave to remind them of our strength. Drive them back." A murmur of approval went through the more hawkish alphas in the hall, but Marwen held up a hand, a small, graceful gesture that nonetheless commanded immediate silence. "Lord Fenris," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily to every corner of the hall. "Your lands are rocky, the soil is thin. Your prey has been scarce for 2 seasons, long before the settlers became a nuisance. Is this not true?" The alpha stared at her, momentarily speechless. "It is, my queen, but—" "And the settlers," she continued, her gaze soft but penetrating. "Their own fields downstream are failing due to the drought. They push upstream not out of greed, but desperation. They seek the same water your prey does." Her unique senses allowed her to feel the truth of things, the emotional currents that lay beneath the surface of politics. She could scent the fear of starvation on him, not just the anger of a territorial dispute. She looked to Corvin, a silent communication passing between them. He saw the wisdom in her eyes, the deeper understanding she possessed, and gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. He was still the storm, but she was its calm, discerning center. "Then this is not a matter for clause, but for counsel," Marwen declared. "We will grant you grain from the royal stores to see your pack through the winter. In return, you will meet with the elders of the human settlement. An accord will be reached. We will teach them which forests are sacred, and they will teach your people how to irrigate the lower fields. We will share the mountain's bounty so that no one, wolf or human, starves at the foot of our throne." Silence. Then Lord Fenris bowed his head, so low his forehead nearly touched the stone. It was not the bow of a subordinate to his king. It was the bow of a follower to his spiritual leader. "Your wisdom honors us all, Queen Marwen. It will be done." As he retreated, a new sense of hope seemed to settle over the court. This was a new way of ruling, a balance of strength and compassion they had never known. Later that night, Corvin and Marwen stood on the high balcony of their private chambers. The wind was cold, but they shared the warmth of a heavy fur cloak. Below them, the vast, moon-drenched kingdom slept. Corvin's arm was a solid presence around her, his hand resting possessively on her waist. "The Winter Queen," he murmured, his breath a white plume in the air. "The prophecy spoke of a ruler who would unite the lands. I always thought it meant through conquest." He looked down at her, his scarred face softened by the moonlight, his silver eyes full of a love that was deeper than any ocean. "It meant through wisdom, your wisdom." Your strength gave me the safety to find my voice, she replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. The steady beat of his heart was the rhythm of her new life. You freed me, Corvin, from the poison, from the silence. No, he said, his voice a low, reverent rumble. You freed me. I was a king of scars, ruling a kingdom of stone. I was content to hold it all together until it broke under the strain. You are teaching us how to heal. He turned her to face him, his large hands cupping her face. That night, when you sent back the flower, my pride was a wounded beast, but my wolf knew. It knew you were calling to your mate, and that nothing else in the world mattered. She rose on her toes and met his lips. This kiss held no rage, no desperation. It was a kiss of deep and abiding love, a silent vow that sealed their bond. It spoke of shared dawns, of whispered counsel in the dark, of two solitary souls who had found their other half in the heart of a storm. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling as one. The prophecy had been fulfilled, but not in the way anyone had expected. The power of the first blood was not a weapon to be wielded, but a light to govern by. And the silver throne was not a single seat of power, but the space between two rulers, a king and a queen, bound by destiny and forged in love. Together, they looked out at the endless expanse of forest and mountain, their kingdom, their home. Their reign had just begun.